Disappear. You're embarrassing me. My son-in-law whispered this at his own wedding reception. I'm Tom Anderson, and I'd just handed him $890,000 in cash. For 30 years, everyone saw me as just the hospital janitor mopping floors, emptying trash, invisible to most. Brandon Phillips, my daughter's new husband, made sure I knew exactly how embarrassing I was to his Harvard MBA image. He wanted my money, but not my presence. What he didn't know was that while he was buying designer suits with Daddy's trust fund, I was quietly buying every property that mattered in this city. Sometimes the greatest gift is showing someone exactly who they just insulted. But I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene. I just smiled and tucked that check back into my jacket pocket. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Here's how a nobody janitor taught an MBA that respect isn't optional and why that lesson cost him everything he thought he wanted. Let me take you back 18 months when my daughter Sarah first brought Brandon home for dinner. I was still working at St. Mary's Hospital then, finishing up my shift in the cardiac wing. Sarah had warned me he came from old money. His father owns Phillips Investment Group downtown. But I figured, hey, if he makes my daughter happy, we'll figure it out. The first red flag? When Sarah introduced us, Brandon actually looked around for someone else, like I couldn't possibly be the father she'd been talking about. You're Sarah's father? He said it like he was solving a puzzle. I was still in my work clothes, navy blue uniform with Tom stitched on the pocket. Nothing fancy, but clean. Always clean. That's right. You must be Brandon. His handshake lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then he asked what I did for career development. Career development. Not work, not job. Career development. I keep the hospital running, I said. 30 years next month. His smile got tighter. Oh, facilities management. Sarah jumped in. Dad's been at St. Mary's forever. Everyone knows him there. Brandon nodded like he understood, but I caught him Googling hospital facilities management salary on his phone during dessert. The number he found, $35,000 a year, made his whole posture relax, like he'd solved another puzzle. That was mistake number 1. He never asked what keeping the hospital running actually meant. Over the next few months, the pattern got clearer. At Sarah's birthday party, he introduced me to his friends as Sarah's father who works at the hospital. Not maintenance, not janitorial, just works at the hospital. Like he was protecting them from something unpleasant. When they got engaged, Brandon's mother asked if I'd be comfortable at the country club reception. Because, it might be different from what I'm used to. Different. Right. The worst part wasn't the condescension I'd dealt with that my whole life. The worst part was watching my daughter shrink a little each time it happened. He doesn't mean it that way, Dad, she'd say. He's just from a different world. Different world. Like respect was geography. But the real kicker came 3 months before the wedding. They were house hunting, looking at a beautiful colonial on Maple Ridge Drive. $2.3 million. Brandon kept talking about how his connections could help with financing, how his family understood these neighborhoods. I was quiet during the whole tour, just listened. At the end, the realtor-nice woman named Jennifer Martinez handed us her card. When she got to me, she did a double take. Wait, are you Tom Anderson from Anderson Holdings? Brandon's head snapped around like he'd been slapped. I think you have me confused with someone else, I said quickly. I work at St. Mary's Hospital. Jennifer looked puzzled for a second, then nodded. Oh, sorry, you look familiar. Brandon relaxed again, crisis averted, but I saw something change in his eyes after that. Like he was suddenly worried there might be more puzzle pieces he hadn't found yet. That's when the wedding planning got really interesting. The seating chart arrived last week. Table 12, back corner, next to the kitchen doors. Perfect spot for the facilities management father-in-law who might say something embarrassing. Sarah tried to explain it away. It's just logistics, Dad. You understand. I understood perfectly. But I also understood something Brandon didn't. I understood exactly what was going to happen next. Because here's the thing about being underestimated for 30 years. You learn patience. You learn timing. And most importantly, you learn that the best lessons are the ones people teach themselves. Brandon was about to get the education of his lifetime. The wedding invitation sat on my kitchen table for 3 weeks before I opened it. Heavy cardstock, gold embossing, the works. Probably cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month. Inside, tucked behind the main invitation, was a smaller card. Reception guidelines for family members. I'd never seen one of these before, but apparently they're a thing in Brandon's world. The guidelines were specific. Please keep conversations light and appropriate for mixed company. Avoid personal anecdotes that might not translate to all guests. Remember that many attendees are business associates and community leaders. Translation: don't embarrass us. I set the card aside and made myself coffee. Same mug I'd used for 15 years, chipped on the handle, but still perfectly good. Some things don't need replacing just because they're not pretty anymore. The real moment of truth came when Sarah called that evening. "Dad, about the wedding." Her voice had that careful tone she'd been using more and more lately. "Brandon's parents have offered to cover your tuxedo rental. They just want to make sure everything coordinates. Coordinates. Like I was a decorative element. That's thoughtful," I said, "but I can handle my own clothes." "I know you can. It's just this venue, these people. It's important to Brandon that everything goes smoothly. Everything, including me." I could have pushed back then. Could have asked why my own daughter's wedding felt like a performance I wasn't qualified for. Instead, I asked the question that had been bothering me for months. "Sarah, are you happy?" Silence on the other end. Too long to be comfortable. "Of course I'm happy, Dad." "Why would you ask that?" "Just checking." But I wasn't just checking. I was calculating. Because if I stayed quiet, if I played along with their seating chart and their guidelines and their careful introductions, what would that cost? Not money. I had more money than Brandon's family could probably imagine. The real cost would be watching my daughter learn that love comes with conditions, that some people matter more than others. That respect is something you earn by staying in your lane. 27 years I'd been raising her. 27 years of showing her that hard work has dignity, that quiet people can have loud impact, that your worth isn't measured by other people's opinions. One wedding reception could undo all of that. I pulled out my laptop and started going through the guest list Sarah had shared with me months ago. 300 people. Brandon's Harvard classmates, his father's business partners, country club members, city council people. The mayor was coming, a few state representatives, and scattered throughout, my people, Dr. Elizabeth Davis, the hospital CEO who'd worked her way up from nursing, Jim Morrison, head of maintenance who'd been my supervisor for 20 years, Maria Santos from housekeeping, who was bringing her husband and 2 kids. These were good people, people who'd watched me come to work every day for 3 decades, people who knew exactly what keeping the hospital running meant. If I disappeared, if I took Brandon's advice and made everyone's life easier, what would they think? That Tom Anderson, the guy who'd never missed a day in 30 years, who'd helped them through divorces and deaths and difficult shifts, wasn't good enough for his own daughter's wedding? That was the real stakes, not the money I'd spend on a gift, not the social awkwardness. The stakes were 27 years of teaching my daughter that she came from people who stand up. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the cashier's check I'd picked up that morning. $890,000. Brandon had mentioned they were looking at houses, student loans, starting their life together. I'd figured a generous wedding gift might help smooth the transition. Now I was looking at it differently. This wasn't just money. This was a test. Brandon wanted me to disappear, but he wanted my check to stay visible. He wanted the benefit of my generosity without the burden of my presence. That's not how respect works. I folded the check and put it in my jacket pocket. Same jacket I'd wear to the wedding tomorrow. Nothing fancy, but clean. Always clean. Then I made a phone call. "Margaret, it's Tom Anderson. I need you to prepare some documents for me. Tomorrow might get interesting." Margaret Wilson had been my real estate attorney for 20 years. She knew exactly what interesting meant when I said it. "How interesting are we talking, Tom?" I looked at the wedding invitation with its gold embossing and careful guidelines. Life-changing interesting. The choice was made. Tomorrow, Brandon Phillips would learn that some lessons can't be taught gently. The wedding ceremony was beautiful. I'll give them that. Grandview Country Club had outdone themselves. White roses everywhere. String quartet. Chairs arranged in perfect rows, facing the gazebo. Sarah looked radiant in her grandmother's pearl necklace, the one piece of jewelry my wife had insisted on keeping when we were young and broke. I sat in the back, table 12, exactly where the seating chart placed me. The view wasn't bad, actually. I could see everything from here, including the way Brandon's groomsmen kept glancing over at the miscellaneous family section, like they were checking for potential problems. The ceremony itself went smoothly. Standard vows, rings, kiss, applause. Brandon's father officiated. He'd gotten ordained online just for this. During his opening remarks, he made a point of welcoming family and friends from all walks of life. All walks of life. Code for we're being inclusive here. The first real test came during cocktail hour. I was standing near the bar, nursing a club soda, when Brandon's college roommate approached. Tall guy, expensive suit, already working on his second bourbon. "You must be Sarah's dad," he said. "I'm Derek. Harvard Business, class of 2018 with Brandon. Tom Anderson. Nice to meet you. So, what's your line of work, Tom? Here we go. I keep things running at St. Mary's Hospital. Administration, medical field's tough these days. All those regulations. I didn't correct him. Let him think what he wanted. Brandon mentioned you've been very generous with the wedding expenses," Derek continued. "That's really something on a hospital administrator's salary." There it was, the fishing expedition. Brandon had been talking. "Family comes first," I said simply. That's when Brandon appeared at my elbow. Perfect timing, like he'd been monitoring the conversation. "Derek, you met my father-in-law." The emphasis on father-in-law was subtle but clear. Obligation, not choice. "Just getting acquainted," Derek said. "Tom was telling me about his work in hospital administration." Brandon's smile flickered for just a second. "Dad's being modest. He's more hands-on than that. Very hands-on. Message received. Blue-collar work, nothing to see here." "Well," Derek said, "it takes all kinds to make the world go round, right?" "Right," Brandon agreed. "Speaking of which, Dad, maybe you'd be more comfortable at your assigned table?" "Dinner's starting soon. More comfortable. Translation, less visible." "Actually," I said, "I wanted to give you your gift first." Brandon's eyes lit up. Finally, something useful from the embarrassing father-in-law. I pulled the cashier's check from my jacket pocket. $890,000 made out to Brandon and Sarah Phillips. Derek's eyes went wide. "Holy shit. Sorry, holy cow, that's a serious wedding gift." Brandon took the check, his hands actually trembling slightly. "Dad, this is incredibly generous. Sarah's gonna—" "There's just one thing," I interrupted. Both men looked at me. "I overheard you earlier talking to your groomsmen. You said something about how the greatest gift would be if I disappeared." The color drained from Brandon's face. "Dad, I didn't— that was just—" "Just what?" Derek suddenly found his drink very interesting. A few other guests had started drifting closer, sensing drama. "It was a joke," Brandon said quickly. "You know, typical groom stress, wanting everything perfect. Perfect." I nodded thoughtfully. "So my presence makes things imperfect?" "No, that's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" The circle of listeners was growing. I could see Sarah approaching from across the room, her face worried. "I meant—" Brandon stopped, looking around at the faces watching us. "Look, can we discuss this privately?" "I think we're past private discussions," I said. "You made your comment in front of your groomsmen. I'm responding in front of your guests." "Dad!" Sarah had reached us, slightly out of breath. "What's going on?" "Your husband was just explaining what he meant about me disappearing," I said calmly. Sarah's eyes darted between us. "Brandon?" "It was a misunderstanding," Brandon said. "Just pre-wedding nerves. You know how it is." "No," I said. "I don't know how it is." "Explain it to me." The string quartet had stopped playing. More people were staring now. I could see Brandon's parents pushing through the crowd, their faces tight with concern. "Tom," Brandon's father appeared beside us. "Perhaps this conversation would be better suited for later." "Later when?" I asked. "After I disappear?" Brandon's mother gasped softly. "What's he talking about?" Brandon made a comment, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the silent cocktail area, "about how the greatest gift would be if I disappeared. I'm just trying to understand what that means for a father at his daughter's wedding." The crowd was definitely listening now. 300 guests, all watching the drama unfold. "It means," Brandon said, his voice strained, "that I want Sarah to be happy. And sometimes family dynamics can be complicated." "Complicated how?" "You know how," His composure was cracking. Different backgrounds, different expectations. Different how? Jesus, Tom, do I have to spell it out? Brandon's voice rose slightly. You're a janitor. This is a country club. These are business people, professionals, community leaders. Sometimes it's just awkward. There it was. The truth, finally. The silence was deafening. I looked at the check in Brandon's hands. $890,000. Then I reached over and took it back. You know what, Brandon? You're absolutely right. This is awkward. I tore the check in half, then in half again. But not for the reasons you think. The pieces of the cashier's check fluttered to the ground like oversized confetti. You could hear 300 people holding their breath. Tom, that was Margaret Wilson's voice cutting through the silence. There you are. I turned to see my attorney approaching through the crowd. Margaret's in her 50s, silver hair, carries herself like she owns every room she enters, which, considering her client list, she basically does. Margaret, I wondered when you'd get here. Traffic was murder coming from downtown. She glanced at the torn check on the ground, then at Brandon's pale face. I see we're having an eventful evening. Brandon's father stepped forward. I'm sorry, who are you? Margaret Wilson, Wilson and Associates. She handed him a business card. I handle Tom's legal affairs. I watched Brandon's father read the card. Wilson and Associates was one of the most prestigious law firms in the city, the kind of firm that didn't handle legal affairs for hospital janitors. Legal affairs? Brandon's mother asked faintly. Oh, you know. Property management, business incorporation, the usual. Margaret's tone was casual, but her eyes were sharp. Tom keeps me busy. Property management? Derek, the Harvard roommate, couldn't help himself. Margaret looked at me. You haven't told them about the portfolio? It hasn't come up in conversation, I said. Portfolio? Sarah's voice was small, confused. Before Margaret could answer, James Thompson appeared at my shoulder. I'd known James for 15 years. He was the general manager of Grandview Country Club. We'd done business together more times than I could count. Mr. Anderson. James's greeting was respectful, professional. I hope you're enjoying the evening. It's been educational, James. I wanted to personally thank you for recommending the upgraded sound system for the ballroom. The acoustic improvement has been remarkable. Brandon's father blinked. Recommending? James looked puzzled. Well, yes. Mr. Anderson's company installed most of our infrastructure systems. HVAC, electrical, security. We wouldn't think of using anyone else. Company? Brandon's voice cracked slightly. Anderson Holdings, James said, like it was obvious. One of our most trusted contractors. I could see the gears turning in Brandon's head. Anderson Holdings, property management, legal affairs, acoustic systems. Dad? Sarah was looking at me like she'd never seen me before. What company? We can discuss it later, sweetheart. No, her voice was stronger now. I want to discuss it now. The crowd was pressing closer. This was better than dinner theater. Margaret opened her leather portfolio and pulled out a folder. Tom, since we're being transparent, should I mention the Riverside Development Project? Which phase? I asked. Phase 3 just broke ground last month. The luxury condos overlooking the lake. Brandon's mother made a small choking sound. Riverside Development? That's a $50 million project. $68 million, actually, Margaret corrected. But who's counting? James nodded enthusiastically. Beautiful work. We've been telling our members about the premium units. Several have already put down deposits. Deposits? Brandon's father was looking increasingly confused. Tom's developments sell quickly, James explained. Quality construction, prime locations. There's usually a waiting list. I felt my phone buzzing. 3 missed calls, all from real estate agents. Word traveled fast in this business. Tom. Dr. Elizabeth Davis had pushed through the crowd. She was still in her evening dress, but her hospital badge was clipped to her purse-old habits. I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I know this is a family celebration. Elizabeth, good to see you. I wanted to personally thank you for the new pediatric wing. The children's families are going to love the play areas. New wing? Sarah was staring at me. The Anderson Family Pediatric Wing, Dr. Davis explained proudly. Tom's donation made it possible. $2.5 million for specialized equipment and family support spaces. Brandon looked like he might be sick. Donation? He managed. Anonymous. Officially, Dr. Davis continued, but everyone at the hospital knows who made it happen. Tom's been our most generous benefactor for years. My phone buzzed again. This time I glanced at it. Jennifer Martinez, the realtor from the Maple Ridge house tour. Excuse me, I said. I should take this. Tom? Jennifer's voice was excited. I just heard the news. Is it true you're interested in 127 Maple Ridge Drive? Potentially. The sellers accepted your offer an hour ago. Cash sale, no contingencies, close in 48 hours. Congratulations. You just bought your dream house. I looked at Brandon. His dream house. The one he'd been talking about financing with his connections. Thank you, Jennifer. We'll talk tomorrow. I hung up and slipped the phone back into my pocket. The crowd was silent again, but this time it felt different, expectant. Well, I said quietly, this has been illuminating. The dinner bell chimed, and 300 guests reluctantly began moving toward the ballroom. But nobody was thinking about the salmon course anymore. I found myself at table 12, exactly where the seating chart had placed me. The back corner, next to the kitchen doors, perfect view of everything that was about to happen. Sarah slid into the seat beside me, her face a mixture of confusion and something else, maybe pride, maybe fear. Dad, she whispered, we need to talk. After dinner, sweetheart. No, now. What's happening here? Anderson Holdings? Donations? That house? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. 27 years old. Beautiful, smart. Caught between two worlds, she was just beginning to understand. What's happening is that your husband just learned something important about making assumptions. But the company, how long have you? 30 years. Started with a cleaning contract at St. Mary's, saved every penny, bought my first rental property with a VA loan, then another, then another. Sarah's eyes went wide. The whole time? The whole time I was mopping floors, I was building something bigger. At the head table, Brandon was in deep conversation with his parents. His face was red, his gestures sharp. I could guess what they were discussing. The first course arrived, some kind of fancy salad that probably cost more than most people's groceries. I ate quietly, listening to the conversations around me. The word Anderson kept floating from other tables, mixed with holdings and development and millions. News traveled fast at country clubs. Halfway through the main course, Brandon stood up, tapped his knife against his champagne glass, the traditional groom's speech. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice carrying across the ballroom, thank you all for being here to celebrate Sarah and me. Polite applause. Marriage is about bringing families together, Brandon continued, about building bridges between different worlds. Different worlds. There was that phrase again. Sometimes those bridges require understanding, patience, the willingness to look past surface differences and find common ground. He was looking directly at me now. My new father-in-law, Tom Anderson, has been educational. He's shown me that people aren't always what they seem. Educational, like I was a lesson plan. Tom works hard, very hard. He's what you might call a self-made man. Self-made, in quotes, basically. But success comes in many forms, doesn't it? And family means accepting everyone, regardless of their background. The pause before background was deliberate. The whole room caught it. So I want to publicly thank Tom for his generosity, for his unique perspective, and for raising the incredible woman who's now my wife. Generosity, unique perspective. The condescension was masterful. Tom, would you like to say a few words? 300 faces turned toward table 12. This was Brandon's power play. Put the embarrassing father-in-law on the spot in front of all these important people. Let him bumble through some awkward working-class sentiment, then move on to dessert. I stood up slowly. Thank you, Brandon. That was illuminating. I could see Margaret Wilson at table 7, a slight smile playing at her lips. Dr. Davis at table 15, her expression curious. James Thompson at the staff table, looking like he was watching a tennis match. You know, I said, my voice carrying easily across the silent ballroom, Brandon's right about success coming in many forms. I paused, letting that sink in. 30 years ago, I started cleaning floors at St. Mary's Hospital. Minimum wage, night shift, invisible to most people. Just like Brandon said, working hard. A few nods from the crowd. This was the story they expected. But here's the thing about being invisible. You see everything. You learn things, like which buildings are well maintained and which ones aren't, which neighborhoods are growing and which ones are dying, which properties might be worth owning someday. The nodding stopped. People were paying attention now. So, while I was mopping those floors, I was also studying, learning, buying my first rental property with a VA loan, then a second, then a third. Brandon's face was changing color. After a while, I had enough properties to need a company to manage them. Anderson Holdings, LLC. Maybe some of you have heard of it. Murmurs from several tables. They had heard of it. Over the years, we expanded. Commercial properties, development projects. That new shopping center on 5th Street? That's ours. The office complex downtown where Phillips Investment Group leases space? Also ours. Brandon's father dropped his fork. The luxury condos at Riverside Development that everyone's talking about? Those are ours too. I looked directly at Brandon. And this morning I purchased another property. A beautiful colonial at 127 Maple Ridge Drive. $2.3 million. Cash, Sarah gasped. That was the house, the one they'd toured together. Brandon, you mentioned earlier that it would be a gift if I disappeared. And you know what? You're right. It would be a gift. The silence was absolute. It would be a gift to you. Because as long as I'm around, you'll have to face the fact that the janitor you're so embarrassed by built an empire while you were spending your trust fund on business school. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a property deed. So here's my wedding gift to you both. The house you wanted but couldn't afford. It's yours. I set the deed on the table. The rent is $4,000 a month. First payment's due next Friday. The explosion of whispers was immediate. 300 people all talking at once. Brandon was standing frozen at the head table, his mouth slightly open. Congratulations on your marriage, I said calmly. I hope you'll be very happy in my house. The ballroom erupted. 300 guests all talking at once, phones appearing, cameras flashing. The mayor was leaning over to his wife, gesturing toward me. Brandon's Harvard classmates were Googling Anderson Holdings on their phones. The country club members were nodding like puzzle pieces were finally clicking into place. Brandon stood frozen at the head table, the property deed in his hand, reading it over and over like the words might change. Tom Anderson, owner and president of Anderson Holdings, LLC, hereby grants residential lease. He looked up at me, his face white. This is real? As real as your Harvard MBA, I said. Sarah was staring at the deed over Brandon's shoulder. Dad, this is our dream house. How did you... I know it's your dream house, sweetheart. You talked about it for months. The kitchen, the master suite, the view of the lake. That's why I bought it. But the rent $4,000 we can't afford. That's market rate for a property of this caliber, I said calmly. Though I suppose Brandon's connections could help with financing. Brandon's father had made his way over from the head table. Richard Phillips, owner of Phillips Investment Group, one of the city's most established financial firms, a man who was used to being the most important person in any room. Tom, he said carefully, I think there may be some misunderstanding here. About what? About this. He gestured vaguely at the chaos around us. This Anderson Holdings situation. What about it? Margaret Wilson appeared beside me, her leather portfolio in hand. Richard, good to see you again. Brandon's father blinked. Margaret? You know Tom? Tom's been my client for 20 years. We've done quite a bit of business together. Business? Margaret opened her portfolio and pulled out a thick folder. Property acquisitions, commercial developments, corporate restructuring, the usual. She handed Richard a document. You might find this interesting. It's Tom's current portfolio summary. Richard's eyes moved down the page. I watched his expression change as he read. $340 million in assets. Conservative estimate, Margaret said. Property values have been rising. But... Richard looked at me, then back at the document. You're a janitor. I was a janitor. I'm also a real estate developer, property owner, and business operator. People can be more than one thing, Richard. Dr. Davis had joined our growing circle. Tom's also our hospital's largest private donor, the new pediatric wing, the cardiac equipment upgrades, the staff parking garage, all Tom. Anonymous donations, I clarified. I prefer to keep my charitable work private. How private? Brandon asked, his voice hoarse. I shrugged. Forbes called last month. They're doing a story about stealth wealth. Successful business owners who maintain modest public profiles. I declined the interview. Brandon's mother appeared at her husband's elbow. Richard, what's happening? Everyone's talking about Tom owning half the city. Not half, I corrected. Maybe 15% of the commercial real estate downtown, 20% of the residential developments in the suburbs. It's a diversified portfolio. James Thompson from the country club had pushed through the crowd. Mr. Anderson, I hope this doesn't affect our partnership agreements. Why would it? Well, if word gets out that you have, he gestured helplessly. Money, I supplied. James, I've had money for 20 years. That's how I've been able to invest in infrastructure improvements, sponsor events, support local businesses, including this place. Support? Brandon's voice cracked. What kind of support? James looked uncomfortable. Anderson Holdings holds the mortgage on our facility expansion. They financed our golf course renovation 3 years ago. You own the country club? Sarah whispered. I own the debt on their expansion, I corrected. There's a difference. Margaret pulled out another document. Tom also holds commercial mortgages on the downtown office building where Phillips Investment Group leases space, the shopping center where Brandon's favorite restaurant operates, the luxury car dealership where he bought his BMW. With each revelation, Brandon looked smaller. This is impossible, he said finally. You can't build this kind of wealth on a janitor's salary. You're right, I agreed. You can't. I looked around the ballroom. 300 faces, all watching, all listening. You can't build wealth on any salary alone. You build it by living below your means, learning your market, taking calculated risks, and working every single day for 30 years without taking shortcuts. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a photo. This is my first rental property. Bought it in 1994 for $38,000. Put $5,000 down, every penny I had saved in 2 years of night shifts. I showed the photo to Brandon. 2-bedroom duplex in what people called a transitional neighborhood. Everyone said I was crazy. Too risky, too run down, wrong side of town. Brandon stared at the photo. That property is worth $400,000 today. And it taught me something important. Value isn't about what something looks like. It's about what it becomes. Sarah was crying now. Not sad tears, something else. Dad, why didn't you tell me? Tell you what? About the business. The properties? The donations? Everything. I looked at my daughter, this beautiful young woman who'd grown up thinking her father was just a man who mopped floors. Because it wasn't about the money, sweetheart. It was about the work. The money was just a way to keep score. But all those times Brandon said, all the comments about your job, those comments taught me something too, I said, looking directly at Brandon. They taught me that some people think respect is something you inherit. That success is something you display. That worth is something other people measure. I folded the property deed and handed it to Sarah. But respect is something you earn. Success is something you build. And worth is something you decide for yourself. The ballroom was completely quiet now. Brandon, you asked me to disappear tonight. You were embarrassed by your blue-collar father-in-law in front of all these important people. I gestured around the room. But here's what you didn't know. Half of these important people are my tenants. A quarter of them bank with institutions that hold my mortgages. And most of them have been beneficiaries of my charitable work without knowing it. I smiled. So the question isn't whether I'm going to disappear, Brandon. The question is whether you're ready to appear. As the man my daughter deserves. In a world that's smaller and more connected than you thought. The silence stretched for what felt like forever. Then slowly someone started clapping. Dr. Davis, then Margaret, then James Thompson. Soon the entire ballroom was applauding. Not for Brandon, for me. The janitor who built an empire while no one was watching. The applause died down, but the energy in the room had completely shifted. Where there had been confusion and shock, now there was something else. Respect, curiosity, and for some people, a healthy dose of fear. Brandon was still standing at the head table, holding the property deed like it might bite him. His face had gone through several color changes and settled on a sickly gray. Tom, his voice was barely above a whisper, I don't understand. If you have all this money, why were you working as a janitor? Who said I stopped working? But you retired. Sarah said you retired from the hospital. I retired from mopping floors. I didn't retire from working. I pulled out my phone and showed him the screen. 47 missed calls, all from this afternoon. Property management is a full-time job, Brandon, just a different kind of uniform. Sarah had been quiet through the revelations, but now she spoke up. Dad, the money you gave us for college, for my apartment, for the car when mine broke down. What about it? I thought you were stretching, sacrificing. I thought you were going without so I could have things. I was never going without, sweetheart. But sacrifice builds character, both in the person giving and the person receiving. Brandon finally found his voice again. So this whole thing, the torn check, the house, all of it, this was planned? Not planned. Reactive. I walked over to where the pieces of the cashier's check still lay on the floor. Someone had swept them into a small pile, but they were still there. $890,000 torn into quarters. I brought that check tonight as a gift. Genuine generosity from a father who wanted to help his daughter start her married life without financial stress. I picked up the pieces. But gifts come with conditions, Brandon. Not legal conditions, respect conditions. You don't get to take someone's generosity while simultaneously wishing they'd disappear. I didn't mean, you meant exactly what you said. You wanted my money and my absence, the benefit without the relationship. Margaret Wilson had pulled out her phone and was making notes. Tom, for the record, how do you want to handle the property transfer? Standard residential lease, month to month after the first year. Security deposit equal to 2 months' rent. $8,000 security deposit? Brandon's voice cracked. Standard for a property of this value, Margaret said matter-of-factly. Tom's actually being generous with the month-to-month option. Most landlords require annual leases for luxury properties. But we can't afford $8,000. We don't have that kind of cash. You had $900,000 5 minutes, I pointed out. The reality was starting to sink in. Brandon turned to his father. Dad, can I what? Richard Phillips looked like he was still processing everything that had happened. The security deposit. Just until we get settled. Richard looked at me, then at his son. Brandon, do you understand what just happened here? Dad, you insulted a man who owns more real estate than our entire investment firm manages. You told him to disappear at his own daughter's wedding. You embarrassed your wife's family in front of 300 people. But I didn't know. That's exactly the problem. You didn't know. You didn't ask. You assumed. The conversation was happening in front of the entire reception. People were openly listening now, no longer pretending to mind their own business. Dr. Davis approached our group. Tom, I hate to interrupt, but I wanted to mention something. What's that, Elizabeth? The board meeting next Tuesday. We're finalizing the plans for the new oncology center. Your foundation's contribution... Foundation, Sarah interrupted. The Anderson Family Foundation, Dr. Davis explained. They've committed $12 million over 5 years for cancer treatment facilities and research. $12 million. I watched Brandon do the math in his head. Elizabeth, I said quietly, we can discuss foundation business later. Of course. I just wanted to make sure you hadn't changed your mind about the naming rights. What naming rights? Sarah asked. Your father has declined to have his name on any of the buildings he's funded, Dr. Davis said. Very unusual for donors of this magnitude. I like my privacy, I said simply. Margaret closed her portfolio. Tom, should I prepare the lease documents for signing tomorrow? Yes, standard terms, standard timeline. Wait, Brandon said desperately. What if we can't make the payments? Then you'll be evicted, same as any tenant who doesn't pay rent. But it's our dream house. No, I corrected, it's my house. It might become your home if you learn how to be a respectful tenant. The weight of it was finally hitting him. The house he'd fallen in love with, the life he'd imagined, the status symbol he'd been planning to show off to his Harvard friends, all of it now depended on his ability to earn my ongoing approval. Tom, Richard Phillips said quietly, what would it take to resolve this situation? Resolve what? This tension between the families. I looked at Brandon, then at Sarah, then at the 300 guests who were still hanging on every word. Richard, there's no tension between families. There's a lesson being learned by one member of one family. Whether he learns it or not is entirely up to him. I picked up the torn pieces of the check and handed them to Brandon. Your choice, son. You can keep looking for someone to fix this for you, or you can figure out how to fix it yourself. How? I smiled. Start with an apology. Not to me, I don't need it. To your wife, for being embarrassed by the man who raised her. The wedding reception continued, but it wasn't really about Brandon and Sarah anymore. By the time they served dessert, a 4-tier cake that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, the story was already spreading beyond the ballroom. I could see guests making phone calls, posting on social media, sending text messages. Anderson Holdings owner revealed at daughter's wedding. Hospital janitor secretly worth $340 million. Local developer teaches son-in-law expensive lesson about respect. The mayor approached me during coffee service. Tom, I had no idea. We should talk about the riverfront development project. Monday morning, I said, through proper channels. Of course. It's just, well, this changes things. It changed a lot of things. By Sunday morning, my phone hadn't stopped ringing. Real estate agents, investment brokers, charity organizations, reporters. The Forbes journalist who'd called last month was suddenly very persistent about scheduling that interview. But the most interesting call came from Phillips Investment Group. Tom? Richard Phillips sounded tired. I hope you don't mind me calling directly. What can I do for you, Richard? It's about Brandon. And the firm. I waited. He's been struggling since yesterday. The lease situation, the house, the public nature of everything. Some of our clients were at the wedding. I imagine they were. The thing is, Tom, Brandon's position here requires a certain level of client confidence, stability, the ability to manage complex financial situations. And it's hard to project financial expertise when you can't afford the rent on your own house. I understood. Brandon worked for his father's investment firm, managing portfolios for wealthy clients. Clients who had been at the wedding. Clients who now knew that the young man advising them on financial matters had insulted his way out of nearly $1 million in family money. What are you asking me, Richard? I'm asking if there's any way to moderate the situation. For Sarah's sake, if not for Brandon's. You want me to give him a discount on the rent? I want you to consider that humiliating my son publicly might affect my daughter-in-law's happiness. It was a fair point, diplomatically made. Richard, let me ask you something. If one of your investment advisors insulted a client worth $340 million, then asked for special favors, what would you recommend? Silence on the other end. I'd recommend that advisor learn how to repair the relationship through professional conduct and personal accountability. Exactly. More silence. The lease stands, I continued. If Brandon wants to renegotiate terms, he can approach me like any professional tenant would approach any professional landlord, with a business plan, references, and a security deposit. Tom, Richard, your son asked me to disappear because I embarrassed him. Now he's embarrassed because he made assumptions about people based on their appearance. The solution isn't to make the embarrassment go away. The solution is to learn from it. I hung up and made myself coffee. Same mug, same kitchen, same routine I'd had for 20 years. Some things didn't need to change just because other people finally knew the truth about them. The real test came Tuesday morning. Sarah knocked on my door at 7 a.m., still in her pajamas, eyes red from crying. Dad, we need to talk. Come in, sweetheart. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she'd done her homework for 12 years, where we'd talked through boys and college applications and career choices. Brandon's been fired. I poured her coffee. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? I'm sorry you're hurting. I'm sorry your new marriage is under stress. I'm sorry your husband is facing consequences. But you're not sorry he got fired. I sat down across from her. Sarah, what do you think should happen when someone makes a serious professional mistake? This wasn't professional. This was personal. Was it? Brandon manages money for clients. His judgment, his character, his ability to handle complex situations, that's all professional. When he publicly demonstrated poor judgment about a major financial opportunity, that became a professional issue. Sarah's hands were shaking around her coffee cup. He's 29 years old, Dad. He made a mistake. And now he's learning from it. By losing his job? By not being able to afford our house? By having everyone in town know that his father-in-law owns him? I don't own him, Sarah. I own a house that he wants to live in. There's a difference. She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since she was 16 and thought I was the most unfair person in the world. This is cruel. No, sweetheart. Cruel would be letting him continue to believe that success is something you inherit instead of something you earn. Cruel would be enabling his disrespect by pretending it doesn't matter. So what happens now? He can't get another job in finance, not after this. We can't afford the house. We can't even afford a decent apartment on unemployment. I reached across the table and took her hand. Now he figures out what he's really made of. Same way I did 30 years ago when I had $5,000 and a willingness to work. But you'll help us, right? I mean, you're my father. I am your father. Which is why I'm not going to rob you of the opportunity to build something real with your husband. Sarah pulled her hand away. That's not fair. Fair would have been Brandon showing basic respect to the man who raised you. Fair would have been him asking about my work instead of assuming he knew what it was. Fair would have been including me in your life instead of trying to hide me from his. I stood up and refilled her coffee cup. But life's not about fair, sweetheart. It's about what you do when things get difficult. Brandon's going to find out what kind of man he really is, and you're going to find out what kind of marriage you really have. She left 20 minutes later, angry and scared, and probably feeling like she didn't know her father anymore. Maybe that was part of the lesson, too. 3 months later, Brandon knocked on my door. It was a Saturday morning in October, crisp air and changing leaves. I was in my driveway, washing my truck's same Ford F-150 I'd been driving for 8 years. Nothing fancy, but it ran perfectly and could haul whatever I needed hauled. Tom? He stood at the end of my driveway, hands in his pockets, looking like he'd lost 20 pounds. Could we talk? Sure, hand me that towel. He passed me the towel and watched me dry the truck's hood. We worked in silence for a few minutes before he spoke again. I got a job. Good for you. It's not finance. It's different. I kept drying. What kind of different? Construction management, small residential projects. The pay is... He shrugged. It's about 40% of what I was making before. But I can make the rent. First month, security deposit, the whole thing. Clean money, earned money. I looked at him, really looked at him. The arrogance was gone. The entitlement had been replaced by something I hadn't seen before. Humility. Sarah, no. She's the one who found the job listing. Sent it to me with a note that said, "Time to build something real." I smiled. That sounded like my daughter. Tom, I owe you an apology. No, you don't. Yes, I do. I judged you. I was embarrassed by you. I wanted your generosity without your presence. That was wrong. I folded the towel and set it on the truck's tailgate. Brandon, I don't need your apology, but Sarah does. And more importantly, you need to give it. I already did, several times. And she said she loves me, but she won't be married to someone who doesn't respect her family. Smart girl. Her mother would have been proud. So what are you going to do about it? Brandon pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket. I wrote you a letter. A real apology, not just words. And I wanted to ask if you'd consider something. What? Let me earn the house. Not just pay rent, but earn it. Prove I'm worthy of living in something you built. I took the envelope but didn't open it. How would you do that? Work for Anderson Holdings, learning the business from the ground up. Maintenance, property management, tenant relations. Show me how you built what you built. It would mean starting over. Entry-level position, basic pay, no special treatment because you're married to my daughter. I know. It would mean admitting that everything you thought you knew about success was wrong. I know that too. I opened the envelope and scanned the letter. It was handwritten. 2 pages, thoughtful and specific. No excuses, no justifications, just acknowledgement and accountability. Brandon, I said after reading it, why do you want to do this? Because I want to deserve Sarah, and I want to deserve the life we're building together, and I can't do that until I understand what real work looks like. I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. Monday morning, 7 a.m. Meet me at the downtown office building. Wear work clothes. Sir? You're hired. Probationary basis. We'll see if you're as smart as your Harvard degree says you are. 6 months later, Brandon made his first independent property deal. 2 years later, I promoted him to project manager. And 5 years after that wedding reception, when my grandson asked what Grandpa Tom did for work, Brandon smiled and said, "He builds dreams, kiddo. One foundation at a time." Sometimes the greatest gift isn't disappearing. Sometimes it's teaching someone how to appear. Thanks for watching this story. If you're dealing with family dynamics or workplace respect issues, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your situation might be more complicated than you think or simpler than you fear. Either way, remember, respect isn't optional. It's earned, it's required, and it's worth fighting for.